The Missouri River roared with the fury of 1,000 stampeding horses as Penelope Hargrove watched in horror, her hands clutching her face, as the rising floodwaters tore her 10-month-old son away from the riverbank where she'd been washing clothes. The spring of 1876 had brought relentless rain to the Dakota Territory, turning the normally manageable river into a raging beast that had just claimed what mattered most in her world. "Thomas!" she screamed, her voice breaking as she stumbled along the muddy bank, her sodden skirts weighing her down. "My baby! Someone help, please!" Her cries caught the attention of a tall, broad-shouldered man watering his horse downstream. Xavier Grant had been on the trail for 3 weeks, driving cattle north from Texas, when the storm had forced his outfit to make camp near the settlement. He turned at the sound of her desperate screams, instantly alert to the crisis unfolding. "What's happened?" he called, spurring his mount toward the frantic woman. "My baby," Penelope sobbed, pointing at the swirling current where a small bundle tumbled downstream. "The river. It took my Thomas." Without hesitation, Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, shedding his duster and gun belt. His eyes narrowed as he tracked the child's path in the churning water. "Then I'll dive till I bring him back," he declared, his voice steady with determination as he plunged into the frigid water. The current immediately seized him, the force nearly taking his breath away. Xavier was a strong swimmer, unusual for a cowboy, having grown up near the Gulf Coast before the call of the open range lured him west. He fought against the powerful surge, keeping his eyes fixed on the small form bobbing ahead of him. Penelope ran along the riverbank, her heart in her throat, watching as the stranger battled the raging waters. Her baby disappeared beneath the surface, then reappeared several yards downstream. The cowboy followed, diving beneath the murky water again and again. Just when she thought all hope was lost, Xavier surfaced with her son clutched to his chest. With powerful strokes, he made his way toward the bank where the river curved, creating a calmer eddy. "Hold on, Thomas," he gasped, keeping the child's head above water. "Almost there." Penelope scrambled over rocks and through brush to meet them at the bend, rushing into the shallows as Xavier staggered toward shore. She reached for her baby, her hands trembling as she took the limp form from the cowboy's arms. "He's not breathing," she whispered, terror seizing her heart. Xavier dropped to his knees beside her, gently turning the child onto his stomach across his forearm. With careful precision, he pressed on the baby's back, forcing water from tiny lungs. Once, twice, 3 times, then a weak cough, followed by a wail that was the sweetest sound Penelope had ever heard. "Thomas," she cried, gathering her son close, rocking him as tears of relief streamed down her face. She looked up at the soaking wet stranger who had risked his life without a moment's hesitation. "You saved him. You saved my baby." Xavier's face, usually stoic beneath his trail-weathered tan, softened at the sight of mother and child reunited. "Just did what needed doing, madam." "Penelope," she offered, still clutching her now screaming son. "Penelope Hargrove." "And I owe you everything, Xavier Grant," he replied, wringing water from his shirt. "And you don't owe me a thing. That little fellow deserves his chance at life." A shout from upstream interrupted them as several townspeople came running, alerted by Penelope's earlier screams. Among them was the town doctor, who quickly took charge of examining the child. "We need to get this boy warm right away," Dr. Miller announced, already removing his coat to wrap around the infant. "My cabin's just up the hill," Penelope said, rising on shaky legs. She turned to Xavier, who stood dripping and shivering despite the spring warmth. "Please, Mr. Grant, you must come too. You need to warm up as well." Xavier hesitated, glancing back toward where his outfit would be waiting. "I should get back to my herd." "Nonsense," Dr. Miller interrupted. "You'll catch your death if you don't dry off properly. The cattle can wait an hour." Reluctantly, Xavier nodded, following the small procession up a narrow dirt path that wound through a stand of cottonwoods to a modest log cabin perched on higher ground, safely away from the river's reach. Inside the cabin, Penelope quickly set about tending to her son while Dr. Miller gave instructions. Xavier stood awkwardly by the door, creating a puddle on the rough-hewn floor. "There are some clothes in that trunk," Penelope called over her shoulder, nodding toward a battered wooden chest. "They belong to my husband." They should fit you well enough until yours dry. Xavier stiffened slightly at the mention of a husband, but moved toward the trunk. Where is your husband, madam? Should someone fetch him? A shadow passed over Penelope's face as she tucked a blanket around Thomas, who had finally calmed. Joseph died last winter. Pneumonia. It's just Thomas and me now. I'm sorry, Xavier said quietly, opening the trunk and finding simple but well-made clothing inside. Dr. Miller finished his examination of the baby and stood. He'll be just fine, Penelope. A miracle, truly. Keep him warm tonight and give him plenty of milk. I'll check on him tomorrow. He turned to Xavier. Young man, you did a brave thing today. Not many would have risked those waters. Xavier shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Wasn't thinking much about risk, document. Just saw a job needed doing. After the doctor left, Penelope set about starting a fire and heating water for tea while Xavier changed behind a makeshift screen. When he emerged in Joseph's clothes slightly short in the arms and legs, but serviceable, Penelope was settling Thomas in his cradle. He's sleeping now, she said softly. I can hardly believe he's here safe. She looked up at Xavier, truly seeing him for the first time now that the crisis had passed. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 27 or 28 to her 24 years. His dark hair curled damply around a face that spoke of long days in the sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer sky. Thank you for the clothes, madam. I'll be out of your way soon as mine dry. Penelope gestured to the rough, hewn table. Please sit. The least I can do is offer you a hot meal before you go. And please call me Penelope. As she bustled about preparing a simple stew, Xavier told her about his outfit: 15 men driving 2,000 head of cattle from Texas to Montana, where a growing settlement needed beef. We'll be moving on tomorrow, he explained, accepting a steaming mug of coffee. Trail boss won't wait, not with grass and water to find. Penelope nodded, understanding the demands of the cattle drive. As a homesteader's widow trying to make it on her own, she knew all too well how unforgiving the frontier could be. Where are you from originally, Mr. Grant? Xavier, please. He took a sip of coffee. Galveston, originally. My father ran a shipping business. I was meant to take it over, but the sea never called to me like the open range did. So you left home to become a cowboy? There was a hint of something in her voice, not judgment, but curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Left when I was 18. Been riding the trails ever since. He glanced around the cabin, noting the feminine touches that softened the harsh frontier reality: a carefully embroidered cushion, dried wildflowers in a clay jar, a small bookshelf with well-worn volumes. What about you? How does a woman like you end up alone in Dakota Territory? A woman like me. Penelope arched an eyebrow as she stirred the stew. Xavier flushed slightly. I just meant you seem educated. This isn't an easy place for anyone, especially not a woman alone with a child. Penelope's shoulders relaxed. Joseph and I came from Pennsylvania 2 years ago. He had dreams of building a cattle ranch of his own. We were just getting started when. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. I couldn't bear to go back east, to admit defeat. This land was our dream, and I mean to keep it, for Thomas, if nothing else. That takes courage, Xavier said simply. No more than diving into a flooded river after a stranger's child, she countered with a small smile. By the time Xavier's clothes had dried by the fire, night had fallen. The stew had been eaten, stories exchanged, and a tentative friendship formed in the aftermath of near tragedy. When he stood to leave, Penelope found herself reluctant to see him go. Your outfit's camped a fair distance, she said. You're welcome to sleep in the barn if you'd prefer not to make the trek in the dark. Xavier hesitated, aware of how such an arrangement might appear to others, but equally aware of the practicality of the offer. I would be obliged, he finally said. I'll be gone at first light. When morning came, Penelope woke to find fresh firewood stacked neatly by the stove and a small carved wooden horse placed carefully beside Thomas's cradle. Outside, she could see Xavier saddling his horse in the pale dawn light. You didn't have to do that, she called, stepping onto the porch with Thomas in her arms. Xavier adjusted his saddle and turned. Seemed like the least I could do. His eyes fell on Thomas, now awake and alert. How's the little man this morning? None the worse for his adventure, thanks to you. Penelope descended the steps, moving closer. Will you pass this way again? On your return journey south, perhaps? Xavier's hands stilled on the saddle strap. Cattle drives don't usually backtrack. Once we deliver in Montana, most of the boys will find new work up north or catch a stagecoach south. I see. Penelope tried to hide her disappointment. But, Xavier added, his eyes meeting hers, a man with no particular ties might choose his own path home. The promise in those words lingered between them as he mounted his horse. With a tip of his hat to Penelope and a gentle touch to Thomas's head, Xavier Grant rode away, leaving behind a widow who found herself thinking of more than mere survival for the first time in many months. The summer passed in a blur of hard work for Penelope, tending her small vegetable garden, caring for the few chickens and the milk cow that provided their sustenance, and keeping up with an increasingly mobile Thomas filled her days. But in quiet moments, when the evening shadows lengthened across the valley, her thoughts often turned to the cowboy who had saved her son. In late September, as the first hints of autumn touched the cottonwood leaves with gold, Penelope was hanging laundry when Thomas, now nearly walking, pointed excitedly toward the trail that led to their cabin. "Mama!" he exclaimed, his limited vocabulary still music to her ears. Penelope turned to follow his gaze and felt her heart skip as a familiar figure on horseback appeared around the bend. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks. She'd imagined this scene so many times over the past months. But as the rider drew closer, there was no mistaking the broad shoulders and easy posture of Xavier Grant. She smoothed her apron self-consciously, aware of her work-worn hands and wind-tousled hair. Thomas had no such reservations, clapping his hands in delight at the approaching visitor, though he couldn't possibly remember the man. Xavier dismounted at the gate, removing his hat as he approached. He looked different somehow. His clothes were newer, his face less weathered by constant exposure. But his eyes were the same clear blue that had haunted her dreams. "Penelope," he said simply, a smile warming his features. "And young Thomas, you're looking mighty fine, both of you." "Xavier," she replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "We weren't sure we'd see you again." "I said I might find my own way back," he reminded her, crouching down to Thomas's level. The boy regarded him curiously, then offered a slobbery wooden toy as a greeting. Xavier accepted it solemnly. "Thank you kindly, sir. What brings you to our corner of Dakota?" Penelope asked as they walked toward the cabin. Xavier straightened, handing the toy back to Thomas. "I've been thinking about settling down, maybe starting something of my own. Trail life gets tiresome after a while." He hesitated, then added, "And I found myself wondering how a certain young widow and her son were faring." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "We're managing. It's not easy, but we get by." Inside the cabin, over coffee and fresh bread, Xavier explained how he'd saved his wages from the cattle drive, supplementing them with work at a ranch near Bozeman before heading south. "I've been looking at land in these parts," he admitted. "The railroad's coming through, and there'll be good opportunities for the right enterprise." "What sort of enterprise did you have in mind?" Penelope asked. "Horses," Xavier said, his eyes lighting up. "Not a big ranch, but quality stock for breaking and training. There's always demand for good horses, especially with the army posts nearby." As the afternoon wore on, Thomas grew sleepy, eventually nodding off in Xavier's arms, an unexpected development that seemed to please and alarm the cowboy in equal measure. Penelope smiled at his careful handling of her son. "He trusts you," she observed softly. "Smart boy," Xavier replied, a gentle teasing in his tone, though he might want to be more discerning in his choice of friends. "I think his judgment is excellent," Penelope countered, reaching for her son. As she took Thomas, her fingers brushed Xavier's hand, sending an unexpected thrill through her. Their eyes met briefly before she turned away to place the baby in his cradle. When she returned, Xavier was standing, hat in hand. "I should find lodging in town before dark. Or," Penelope suggested, gathering her courage, "you could stay for supper. The barn is still available, as before." Xavier studied her face. "People might talk, Penelope." "A young widow with a strange man staying on her property, people already talk," she interrupted with a hint of defiance. "I'm a woman alone trying to run a homestead. They've been talking since Joseph died." She softened her tone. "Besides, you're hardly a stranger anymore. You're the man who saved my son's life." In the end, he stayed not just that night, but for several days, helping with repairs around the property that Penelope had been unable to manage alone. He fixed the leaking roof, mended the corral fence, and chopped enough firewood to last well into the winter. On the fourth day, as they worked side by side harvesting the last of the garden vegetables, Penelope broached the subject that had been on her mind. The Henderson place, about 3 miles east of here, it's for sale. Good water, decent pasture. Mr. Henderson's widow is moving back to Ohio to live with her daughter. Xavier straightened, wiping his brow. Is that so? It might suit your horse business. Penelope continued, trying to sound casual. And it's close enough that we could. That is, Thomas and I wouldn't be far if you needed anything. A slow smile spread across Xavier's face. Are you suggesting I become your neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove? I'm merely pointing out a business opportunity, Mr. Grant, she replied primly, though her eyes danced with amusement. That evening, as Thomas slept and they sat before the fire, the conversation turned more serious. I went to see the Henderson place today, Xavier admitted. It's promising. Needs work, but the bones are good. Penelope nodded, her hands busy with mending. Sarah Henderson will be relieved to sell it quickly. Winter's coming, and she's eager to leave before the snows. There's something else I've been meaning to ask you, Xavier said, his voice taking on a careful tone that made Penelope look up from her sewing. That first day, in the river, how did Thomas fall in? The question caught her off guard. She set her mending aside, memories of that terrible day flooding back. I was washing clothes. I had him in a basket nearby, but he'd just started crawling properly. I turned away for only a moment. Her voice faltered. The bank gave way beneath the basket. I lunged for him, but the current was so strong. If you hadn't been there. Don't, Xavier said gently, reaching across to take her hand. What matters is that he's safe now. The warmth of his hand around hers was both comforting and thrilling. Penelope found herself unable to look away from his face, illuminated by the flickering firelight. Why did you come back, Xavier? Truly, he didn't release her hand. I told myself it was to check on you both. Then I told myself it was to explore business opportunities. A rueful smile crossed his face. But the truth is, Penelope, I couldn't stop thinking about you. About Thomas. About what it might be like to build something permanent for once in my life. The weeks that followed were transformative for all of them. Xavier purchased the Henderson property and threw himself into preparations for winter, while still finding time to help Penelope with her more demanding chores. Their evenings often found him at her cabin, sometimes bringing meat from his hunting or supplies from town. As October turned to November, the first snows began to dust the Dakota hills. The approaching winter lent urgency to their preparations, but also to the growing connection between them. Each evening's parting became more difficult, the good nights lingering longer at the door. It was after the first significant snowfall, with the land blanketed in pristine white, that Xavier arrived at Penelope's door with more than just supplies. Thomas, now comfortable with the tall cowboy's presence, toddled immediately to him for the customary sweet Xavier always carried in his pocket. Careful, little man, Xavier laughed, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders. You'll wear out your welcome. Never, Penelope assured him, taking his coat. He adores you. And what about his mother? Xavier asked, his tone light, but his eyes serious as he set Thomas down with his toys. Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. His mother is grateful for your friendship. Friendship, Xavier echoed, watching her closely. Is that what we have, Penelope? She busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his presence behind her, solid and reassuring. What would you call it? I'd call it a beginning, he said softly. If you'd allow it to be. Penelope turned to face him, her heart hammering in her chest. Joseph has been gone barely a year. I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not asking for promises, Xavier interrupted gently. Just permission to court you properly, with time and respect. The sincerity in his eyes undid her. I would like that very much, she whispered. That night, before he left, Xavier kissed her for the first time, a tender, questioning touch of lips that left them both breathless with possibility. Winter in Dakota Territory was a harsh master, but it also brought a closeness that might have taken months to develop otherwise. With travel difficult between homesteads, Xavier spent more time at Penelope's cabin than his own half-built house, often staying several days when storms made the trails impassable. During these extended visits, They established a domestic rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Xavier would tend to the livestock, while Penelope prepared meals. Evenings were spent reading aloud by lamplight or teaching Thomas simple games. In those quiet moments, watching Xavier's patient interactions with her son, Penelope felt the last of her reservations melting away like snow in spring sunshine. By Christmas, it seemed the most natural thing in the world when Xavier presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "It's not much," he apologized as she carefully unwrapped it. Inside lay a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a river lily, clearly purchased from a proper jeweler rather than the general store. "Xavier, it's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the intricate petals with her fingertip. "I ordered it from St. Louis," he admitted. "Had it sent to Bismarck and picked it up last month when I went for supplies." "You planned this so far in advance?" Penelope asked, touched by the thought that had gone into the gift. "I've been planning a lot of things," he said meaningfully, taking her hands in his. "Penelope, I know it hasn't been very long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love Thomas. I want us to be a family." Joy bubbled up within her, unexpected and overwhelming. "Are you proposing, Mr. Grant?" "I reckon I am, Mrs. Hargrove," he replied, his smile warm but his eyes serious. "Though I understand if you need more time." "No," she interrupted, squeezing his hands. "No more time. Life is too uncertain out here to waste it when you know what you want." She took a deep breath. "And I want you, Xavier. I think I have since the day you dove into that river after my son." The wedding took place in January, a small affair in the town's newly built church. Thomas, now 14 months old and tottering confidently on sturdy legs, served as ring bearer, carrying a small pillow down the short aisle with Xavier's help. As Penelope spoke her vows, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in less than a year. From the depths of grief and the terror of nearly losing her child, she had found new love and hope for the future. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared as snowflakes drifted past the church windows. "Mr. Grant, you may kiss your bride." Xavier's kiss held promise and passion in equal measure, a fitting beginning to their life together. That spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. Xavier's horse operation began to take shape, with 4 quality broodmares purchased from a Montana rancher and a stallion that drew admiring glances from everyone who saw him. The cabin at the Henderson place was expanded to accommodate their growing family, which now included Penelope's expectant condition news that had brought tears of joy to Xavier's eyes when she'd shared it in March. On a warm May afternoon, almost exactly a year after the river had nearly claimed Thomas's life, they picnicked on the hillside overlooking their property. Thomas, now a sturdy toddler of nearly 2, chased butterflies through the wildflowers while Xavier rested his hand on Penelope's rounded belly. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly, watching her son play. "The day we met." Xavier nodded, his thumb tracing circles on her hand. "Every day, I think about how close we came to never knowing each other. If I'd camped a mile further north, if I hadn't heard your cries. Or if you hadn't been the kind of man who would dive into a flooded river for a stranger's child," Penelope added. "There wasn't really a choice to make," Xavier said simply. "I saw something precious being swept away, and I couldn't stand by and watch." Penelope leaned against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that this man, who had risked everything for her son without hesitation, would be the father her children deserved. "You saved more than just Thomas that day, you know. You saved me too." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "We saved each other, I think." As the summer sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, the young family made their way home. Thomas rode proudly on Xavier's shoulders, pointing out birds and clouds with excited exclamations, while Penelope walked beside them, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other clasped firmly in her husband's strong grip. The river that had nearly taken everything from her had, in its way, given her everything, instead a second chance at love, a father for her son, and a future brighter than she'd dared to dream. As they crested the rise that revealed their homestead, Penelope offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the brave cowboy who had changed the course of their lives with 6 simple words: "Then I'll dive till I bring him back." In the years that followed, their family and fortunes grew together. Xavier's horse business flourished, eventually supplying mounts for the cavalry at Fort Abraham Lincoln and stagecoach companies throughout the territory. Penelope gave birth to a daughter that summer, whom they named Eliza Rose, followed by twin boys 2 years later. Thomas grew into a fine young man who inherited his stepfather's affinity for horses and his mother's determination. Though he never remembered the day the river nearly claimed him, the story of Xavier's courage became family legend, retold at gatherings and celebrations as the ultimate testament to how love could arrive in the most unexpected moments, changing the course of lives like the river changed the land suddenly, completely, and forever.